Laura Knight, born Laura Johnson, was born in Long Eaton, Derbyshire in 1877. Her family produced lace-making machines. Her mother taught art, hence her own leanings in that direction, one might assume. She first took art lessons from a local painter in northern France during a family holiday there. And at the early age of 13, she enrolled in Nottingham School of Art, where her mother taught. The year was 1890, and it was the year in which the family business was declared bankrupt. However, 4 years later, she won a scholarship to South Kensington Art College. And looking back in her biographies that she wrote to later in life, she remarked, and I quote, "The Impressionist movement was then a blank to us all. The late Victorian ideal still lingered." Now, that's quite a curious quote because you'll notice that the definite influence on her, certainly on her early paintings, of the Impressionist style. In 1899, Laura Knight joined the artist colony in Staithes in Yorkshire. She went with her fellow student, Harold Knight, and they married in 1903. Right, that's a bit of biographical details. This is called The Fishing Fleet. Despite her earlier comments about French Impressionism, we can certainly discern the influence of Impressionism, the Impressionist style in this painting. It's a very early painting. 1903 was also the year she had her first painting accepted by the Royal Academy's Summer Show. Dressing the Children, this is another early painting. Around the time of this painting, the Knights had their first joint exhibition in London before moving to Newlyn to join the artists' colony in Cornwall in 1907. So I'll just leave you to enjoy that painting for a moment. However, it was not before completing this painting of Cheyne's Walk in Chelsea. And again, we can certainly see the influence of Impressionism on this painting. The beaches at Newlyn were a rich source of material for her work, where she would make studies of children in bright sunlight. This one is called The Beach. Quite a large canvas, 40 by 50. So 3'6" by 4 foot, thereabouts. And this was shown in the Royal Academy in 1909 to much acclaim, apparently. Around this time, she began painting compositions of women in the open air on rocks on cliff tops around Lamorna in Cornwall. Here's one. She calls this the Dark Pool. The most striking thing about this painting, I think, is the orange color in the model's dress. It seems to be complemented well with the pale blues and turquoises of the sea and sky, and the bright ochres in the rocks as well. So she's already showing a propensity towards color. This is the most intriguing painting I've come across of Laura Knight's. It's what I would call a narrative painting, because there's something going on in this painting between these two ladies. They could be sisters, they could be mother and daughter, possibly, or they could just be friends, but they're in conversation about something. And this, you'll see, is you can find this particular painting in Cardiff. So she used two of her regular models for this painting, who were Phyllis Fypond and Marjorie Taylor. I can't tell you which is which. The dog is Tip, her own pet, and there's the dog there. Notice the shoes, presumably belonging to the woman sitting. This painting was painted in situ in open air, on plein air. Knight wrote later about her clambering, and I quote, along the cliff edge and over slippery rocks every day, carrying 6-foot canvases on my head. I'd love to know what they're talking about. Self-portrait and nude. The National Portrait Gallery, and I'm quoting from the National Portrait Gallery's catalogue here, this self-portrait is a bold statement of Knight's ambition at a time when men still dominated the art world. The model is her friend and artist Ella Napper. As a female student at Nottingham School of Art in the 1880s, Knight and other female students had been prohibited from making life drawings of nude models. The portrait is a bravura statement about the ability of women to paint hitherto taboo subjects on a scale and with an intensity that heralds changes. The large canvas on the left throws a shadow on the wall. So if you're slightly confused, there's the canvas on the left that she's painting. She's got a paintbrush in her hand there, and this is the model, of course. And the shadow that it refers to is just about there. Two Fishes depicts the stream which flows into Lamorna, Cornwall. These were war years, of course. 1915, you can see that this was painted. It's a watercolour in private collection. And because they were war years, the Ministry of Defence had prohibited all outdoor painting to inhibit espionage. To get over this, Knight later reflected that she, and I quote, she had to lie on my stomach under gorse in dread of being taken off to prison, and in order to make sketches. Several artists fell foul of this restriction, which was eventually eased after much lobbying. It's a delightful painting, full of light, catching the water, and the two children fishing on the bank there. Lovely. This is a portrait of Lamorna Birch and his daughters. Samuel John Birch was a fellow artist and he was persuaded to give himself the sobriquet of Lamorna in order to distinguish him from a fellow artist of the same name. So he went through life being known as Lamorna Birch. This very large canvas was begun in 1916, but left unfinished and only exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1934, hence the large stretch of dates at the bottom of the canvas there. The New York Times commented, and this is a curious comment, but not too surprising coming from over the Atlantic. It was ruggedly British with roast beef forthrightness. So make of that what you will. Notice how Knight captures the dappled Cornish light, as she did in the previous painting of the two fishes. So it is a very colourful painting, and she's not content in painting the trees in a sort of monochrome, in monochrome tones, but introducing a lot of colour into the trees. Might represent lichen, but it makes for a colourful, very colourful painting. And it's a large painting as well, 85 inches by 102 inches. And this can be seen in Nottingham, as you can see. So now we're going to leave Cornwall and come on to her ballet and theatre paintings. The Knights moved to London in 1919, right at the end of the First World War. The Aglieff's Ballet Russe had premiered in London in 1911, and Knight was much taken with its productions. In this painting, Le Carnaval, she catches a moment prior to curtain call. The Aglieff is seen on the extreme left in a top hat, so these are clips by this man in this red jerkin. But that apparently is the Aglieff himself. The other performers have been identified and include the prima ballerina, and you'll have to excuse my pronunciation of Russian names here. And I'm referring to this lady here in the blue dress, who is Lubov Technicheva. I do apologize for that appalling pronunciation, but anyway, she was a prima donna, principal ballerina. Laura got to know all the principal dancers and was a familiar figure backstage. The next painting is of Tamara Kasavina, slightly easier to pronounce, in The Firebird. This is a much smaller painting, as you can see, only 17 by 17. She performed in Stravinsky's ballet of that name, The Firebird, which I'm sure is familiar to most of you. Very colourful painting, that one. But again, there's strong impressionist element to it. The following painting, Behind the Scenes in the Coulisses. The coulisses is a French word meaning the wings. We call them the wings. So we see the ballerinas getting ready to perform Chopin's Les Sylphides, possibly at the Alhambra in London, 1919, it's been suggested. The two figures on the right are perhaps dressers. And notice this subtlety of the complementary red and green either side of the painting. So you've got the green of that particular curtain there, and complementing the red of this dresser's top. Yeah, inevitably reminded of Degas. Degas, a lot of Degas paintings of ballet dancers. Next, we have a portrait of the great Russian ballerina, and again with the unpronounceable name, Lubov Chernicheva. That's a slightly better effort, I think. So she's there. She is, and she's looking very prim and demure. I think you'd agree. Very confident as well she might be. very comfortable in her own skin, as they say. Another star of the Ballet Russe was Olga Spesova, and here she's seen tying her shoelace, or a ballet shoelace, I should say, shouldn't I? There's a lot of contrast in this work. The arched figure of the ballerina against this yellow-green flat, I suppose it would be called, or wings or whatever, and then these two figures on the extreme left are caught in very bright light from the theatre lights, presumably, and they contrast quite heavily with the dresser on the, well, we assume it's a dresser. She's certainly somebody who's helping. Seems to be holding a drink, maybe, possibly a drink for the ballerina once she's equipped herself with the ballerina shoe, with the shoe, yeah. So these two characters really dominate this painting rather than the ballerina. Knight was also much interested in the West End Theatre in London, and similarly able to sketch backstage. At Drury Lane, for instance, she produced this painting, a dressing room at Drury Lane, of members of the Anna Pavlova's company. At first, the prima donna Anna Pavlova gave permission for Knight to visit backstage, but then withdrew it, sending the artist a rather snotty note saying, rather tartly, and I quote, "Madame Pavlova asks, will Mrs. Knight please confine her attention to the stage?" It's assumed she wanted all Knight's attention focused on her. Notice the compositional use of the mirror. There we are, there's the mirror. And the reaction of the ballerina on the left, as though she's just been made of our arrival in the dressing room and is curious to see who we are. Quite a censorious look on her face, I think. Knight captures the scene, this time more of as a social realist painter, and her style is starting to change somewhat and move away from the impressionist style. Eventually, she turns her attention from ballet to the theatre. For instance, in this painting of Gwen Franken Davis dressing for the part of Juliet. She gives us a fly-on-the-wall view of what was customarily off limits to the general public, of course. With her back turned to us, we are not supposed to be there. Notice the use of the mirror again to capture a double pose. So we've got front and back of the famous actress. The costume contrasts with that of the prim apron dresser on the left. Gwen Davis was a famous British stage, screen and radio actress and made her final appearance on TV at the age of 100. Very colourful painting. This is mixture. I'm reminded of Gauguin's paintings with this drape over this chair. The mix of colours. And this painting she simply calls a theatre dressing room. This is of the same actress at the Malvern Festival, apparently, in the unglamorous act of running tap water as she gets herself ready for another theatre role. A necessary but insalubrious scene, It's all part of theatre life, of course. And there we've got the various still life of the various trappings of a theatre dressing room. It all seems very confined there and pokey, doesn't it? She hasn't got a great deal of room there, so I don't know what she thought about it. Some of her day clothes are hanging on hooks on the extreme right. And there we are. It obviously took Laura Knight's attention to paint this particular scene, warts and all, I suppose you'd have to say. Later in her artistic career, she captures the chaotic multicolour of the prop basket, with two dressmakers beavering away in the top right-hand corner. There they are. So an awful lot of colour going on there. A profusion of colour, you'd have to say. And everything is just... It looks as though it's been rummaged through at great haste by the dressers. This painting, of course, we have to say, owes a lot to the Impressionist style again. So she's fluctuating between Impressionist painting and realist painting. Then we move seamlessly into the theatre wardrobe, painted in the same year. So here's a technician or somebody who actually produces these costumes, beavering away on a very elaborate blue and red costume for, we don't know for what part it is, but it's obviously and I'm drawn to all this litter that's all on the floor. Again, it's warts and all, and then we've got the old on the extreme right. We've got the old Singer sewing machine there. Notice, and so Knight has painted this pretty well, I suspect, as she actually sees it, witnesses it. So then we have a change of interest for Knight. In the early 1930s, she travelled for a season with Carmo's circus and became friends with a Major Atherley, who introduced her to Captain Bertram Mills. Mills had just started his soon-to-be world-famous circus, which you'll all remember, of course, Bertram Mills Circus. Knight and Mills immediately became close friends, and he gave her permission to go wherever she liked in the circus. The Major Atherley commissioned several circus paintings, including this one called The Last Act, which is basically a surrealist phantasmagoria of Smart's acts. And the Major, we can see the Major himself. She's popped him in to the bottom right-hand corner there. Presumably that's his wife right behind, and she's holding a dog, a pet dog, I'm guessing. Other circus scenes, which she put together in a gallery exhibition at the Alpine Club, followed. So there we've got a musical clown painted in 1930 in conversation with this scantily clad performer. He looks as though he's got a saxophone there. Very bright painting. This is an interesting painting. The three clowns, and they are dressed obviously as clowns, in clowns' uniforms, but they seem that if you look at their faces, they're in deep discussion about something, whether it's they're not being paid enough, or I don't know, but they're not silly, not performing in this painting. So she's caught them in their normal everyday guise, in a sense, although they haven't bothered to. They're in between acts, I'm guessing, but they look very serious. They look to be discussing. It could be anything really. It's a sort of narrative painting. You could apply any sort of narrative to this painting. What are they discussing? Has somebody had a bad accident and they're wondering how they're getting on, and all that sort of thing? Is full of interest, this painting. And look at this huge ball that this one clown has got on under his right arm. Now we know who these clowns are. Randy is on the left, Marber and Joe Burt on the right. So Joe Burt and Marber. She inevitably became very close to these circus folk. She paints them between acts, chatting as ordinary people, as they are here, pursuing a living. She wrote later in her autobiography that she was, and I quote, accepted by owners, grooms, and performers as an inevitable accompaniment of the show. This one is called The Trick Act. It features Joe Burt again there, squatting down, and the rider is a lady called Mona Connor. These performance paintings were painted in situ and at high speed and finished in a makeshift studio she'd arranged for herself at a side tent. She was especially interested in capturing the light coming through the canvas. You can see that at the top of the painting, obviously. Joe Burt, a particular friend, is painted again in Circus Matinee with the acrobat Herbert Hansen, and we've already met Mona Connor. And there's Mona Connor, and there's the acrobat, and there's Joe Burt. These speckled horses that they used in the circuses in those days were called Knabstruppe horses. There seems to be much to discuss again between the characters in this scene. We're catching, Laura Knight is catching them in their private moments. Knight, she wrote the backstage atmosphere, and this is a direct quote from her autobiography. She found the atmosphere hazy, as if glazed with cadmium yellow, filled with a sense of peace, and the animals were dozy in their comfort. This painting was exhibited in the Royal Academy in 1938 in preference to Wyndham Lewis's famous portrait of T.S. Eliot. Augustus John, we're told, was absolutely furious and resigned from the Royal Academy in protest. Oh dear, I hear you say. Ali Up was painted in as late as 1954, based on a sketch she made in 1930. It was a recollection of a scene witnessed many times by Laura Knight at Mills and Carmo's circuses. So there's a lot of movement in this, and the performers look particularly young to me. And there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the back of this horse, doing impossible feats, I should imagine. The horse obviously is moving as well. In the 1920s, she produced some figure studies and portraits of women, such as Ethel Bartlett, a very close friend. She was a concert pianist and would perform at the Knight's studio concerts. It's a very cool, elegant portrait, very typical of portrait painting of the time, and helped to establish Laura Knight as a painter of modern professional women. So this painting is in stark contrast to the next one, called Susie, after a Cornish fisherman's daughter, a far more intimate portrait, as you can see. It earned Laura Knight the accolade of most outstanding artist in the Royal Academy of that year. I particularly like the blue background there. It shows off this very pale pink garment, chemise, dress, whatever it is that she's wearing. But and the expression on the girl's Susie's face is rather reminiscent of the expression on the face of the performer in the Drury Lane dressing room when she turned around and looks challengingly at we, the viewer. A lot of character in this face, I think. Dressing was a sister painting exhibited at the same time, and again, it's of an intimate scene. The Daily Express art critic wrote of the two paintings, "For sheer actuality, there is nothing else in the whole Academy that can stand up to them." So she's used pale tones and caught the lady dressing in movement, just turning around. She's just got her one foot in the slipper. The other slipper, you'll notice, is hiding under the bed there. It was A.J. Munnings, the famous painter of horses, who pointed Knight in the direction of Epsom races, suggesting that racehorses might be a rich source of inspiration for her. But it wasn't the horses which took her interest, but the gypsies encamped there, as we can see from these next few paintings. And she would be seduced, no doubt, by the bright colours of their attire. This painting is called Romany Bells, as you can see. And the race course, the racetrack, is in the background there. So it's just she's more interested in these and not so much the gypsies, but I suspect it's what they're wearing, the colours. She can go to town with the colours. And this particular gypsy seems to have some sort of maybe a crystal ball in her hand, or she's perhaps trying to sell something. I don't know. This is the gypsies at home, the gypsies encampment on the Epsom races. It's full of interest, full of detail. People just sitting around and having food. One's washing there. This man is, I don't know what this man's doing. He's just taking his ease. And then these three ladies are standing around this fire with the water being boiled there. And then we've got these lovely gypsy caravans and make quite a backcloth to it. And the washing on the line as well. It's all part and parcel of a realist, an attempt at realism. I think this this is why we would call her a modern realist painter, I think, rather than an impressionist. In the next picture, she captures the generation gap between the older woman's resigned expression and the younger woman's rather guarded, suspicious look. Again, the racecourse is going on in the background. The cars are parked there, as you can see. Very weathered face. And this gypsy, she's got a palm. She's holding a palm out, hoping for somebody to cross it with silver, no doubt. And then again, we've got young and old here. The older woman we know to be Lilo Smith, with whom Knight became very friendly, and friendly enough to gain her trust anyway. And the younger woman is her daughter-in-law, Rose. She painted the gypsy women in their Ascot finery, exemplified by these ostrich feathers. So, in a sense, in their own way, they're perhaps competing with Ladies' Day. A more down-to-earth painting is the watering can. The gypsy here has a more thoughtful, evocative expression on her face. It's a careful rendering of the nomadic lifestyle with a touch of longing and sadness, as she probably looking on the wealth that surrounds her, the punters at the race, especially on Ladies' Day. Many of these gypsy paintings are undated, but they all relate to the 1930s. And it was in 1936 that Laura Knight became the first woman elected to full membership of the Royal Academy. And the following year, she became the first woman artist to sit on the hanging committee for the summer exhibition, although, as a woman, she was barred from the annual banquet. So during the Second World War, she was a war artist, and she accepted several commissions with a particular brief to emphasize women's contribution to the war effort. Now, the one on the left is of Corporal Robbins, who was awarded the Military Medal for conspicuous bravery exhibited in the Battle of Britain. The citation read, "She displayed courage and coolness of a very high order in a position of extreme danger." And two other recipients of the Military Medal are painted on the right of the screen, Elspeth Henderson and Helen Turner. All three women had continued at their posts after their respective buildings had received direct hits from German bombs. So there we have three very brave women. She was also commissioned to paint a bomber crew for 500 guineas. A lot of money in those days. She chose to depict the flight checks made by the crew just before takeoff. I suspect if this is a Lancaster bomber, there would have been more than 4 in the crew. But anyway, we've got the 2 pilots on the top of the painting, and then we've got a navigator there, where we can tell he's a navigator because he's looking at his maps. All the crew members have been identified. The navigator was Flying Officer William Escrit, later killed in action in 1944. At the time of this painting, the knights actually were living in Malvern. And not surprisingly, you would find this and the previous paintings in the Imperial War Museum. A lot of detail in this painting, but she's made it very interesting to look at and very colourful. As we can say with this one as well. Ruby Loftus was chosen to represent women working in the munitions factory. This is Ruby Loftus screwing a breech ring. There we are. Again, awful lot of detail there. The factory was in Newport, South Wales. Ruby later recalled that Knight had watched her at work for an entire day, making countless sketches. This painting was voted Picture of the Year at the Royal Academy in 1943 and was used as a poster in factories up and down Britain, and also featured in a propaganda film produced by Pathé News. We can see the tremendous technical skill, virtuosity, and painstaking detail in this iconic painting. I'll give you a minute to look at that because there's so much in that painting to take in. Lorna Knight was next asked to produce a poster to warn of the dangers of working in armament factories. Again, massive amount of detail in this painting. It's a watercolor actually, but it's a large watercolor. It's 5 foot by what, 8 foot, something like that, 9 foot. This painting called a Sterling bomber that they're working on. For the painting, she had to go to Longbridge in the West Midlands. The painting features Trudy Freckleton, and this will be Trudy Freckleton here looking at plans. The first female supervisor on bomber construction at the factory. However, a £500 price tag for the work was rejected, and it was subsequently bought for the factory by a director and hung there for a while. It's now in Milton Keynes, as you can see. A lot of green in this painting. Green in the shadows and the roof there, and green everywhere you look, really. And then reds, which complement greens, of course, have been introduced into this fuselage. I'm assuming it's a fuselage. As I said, the Knights lived in Malvern during the war and afterwards as well. And their stay there produced a few landscapes, of which Sundown is one. These landscapes were generally unpopulated. This one is called Storm Over Our Town, Malvern. It's a dramatic painting. Notice the cyclists scurrying away from the rain and the windswept umbrellas at the bottom of the painting, and these pedestrians running, trying to cope with the extreme weather. So you feel sort of damp and wet just looking at this painting. Difficult to paint rain for obvious reasons. The last painting we're going to look at is this striking portrait of Joan Rhodes. She was actually a professional strong woman and stunt artist. Her act included bending iron bars and tearing telephone books in half with a twist of the wrist. Knight remarked that she displayed no bulging muscles and greatly admired her feminine beauty, which she captures here. It's a striking portrait. I seem to remember as a child watching on the television, in the early television, uh, people ripping telephone directories in half. They don't do that anymore, do they? In 1965, Laura Knight became the first woman to have a solo exhibition at the Royal Academy. She wrote 2 autobiographies and died in 1970 at the age of 93. Often labelled erroneously, in my opinion, as an impressionist painter, a more accurate description of her style would surely be as a modern realist. She rarely painted men and was keen to emphasize the role of women in society as accomplished individuals. Judging by where the galleries which display her paintings are situated, she doesn't appear to have attracted much international recognition. You probably noticed that almost all of these paintings are in British galleries and museums. She was a keen and active promoter of her own work, and capitalizing on her membership of the Royal Academy, organized group exhibitions up and down the land, seeking her own recognition. This was unusual. Generally, serious artists would rather shy away from promoting their own work and leave it to the galleries and agents. However, there's no doubt she blazed a trail through the 20th century as far as female painters were concerned. It could be said, however, her lack of engagement with other 20th century art modernist movements, like, for instance, Surrealism and Cubism, may have resulted in her work being somewhat overlooked. Until now, perhaps.